those of you that don't know me, I am Pat Graves, and I have the honor of serving as the president of Monmouth College. And this is such a nice event where we bring our students and our community members, our alumni together to wrestle with an issue, right, that impacts all of us, right, agriculture and food. So tonight is our 9th annual Wiswell-Robeson Lecture. Special events like this really help us forge a strong connection between the residents, especially of Warren County, and our campus community of learners. Tonight's speakers, as well as those in the past 8 years, provide exposure to timely issues in agriculture topics that not only impact our area farmers, but challenge our students to think critically about agriculture, about farm and the food industry, and all its components and the impact that it has on the U.S. and the world. So the person responsible for making this lecture possible is Monmouth College's own alumni, Jean Robeson, the class of 1960. The lecture was founded in 2016 through a generous gift from Jean, which has enabled us to bring in notable speakers from the agriculture community to campus, discussing issues and challenges and innovations in the field. Jean was born as a local girl, right? Raised here in Warren County, where she has deep roots in farming, and she takes great pride in being the leader in her family's farming operations. Jean, we are so grateful for your loyalty to Monmouth College in establishing this lecture series. Please stand and let us recognize your contributions. For those of you who know me, I always have a lot to say, and I have a lot to say about our speaker, but that honor is not mine tonight. Our speaker is a member of our Board of Trustees, Robin Calloway, and has been a great advisor to me as the president and to some of the senior staff, as well as a great board member, and you'll hear a little bit more about her. But she is a passionate person about food and the impact that it has, and she's very passionate about Kappa, and I noticed that the Kappa women are here to support her, and as well as Monmouth College and the impact that it's had on her life. I might have even more to say about who's going to introduce her, Professor Connell. Professor Connell is a member of the committee that chose tonight's speaker. Dr. Mike Connell received a JD and a PhD in economics from the University of Illinois and has become one of the best examples of a Monmouth College professor whose teaching exemplifies our mission and our readying our students for success. Joining our community in 1993, Mike has left his mark on campus with a very bright, vibrant school spirit, a really unique Pepsi collection, and a dedication to Monmouth students in all aspects of their lives. He's at athletic games, he's at concerts, he's helping students by cheering them on, he knows how to wave a flag at many different events, and is that Hatch's Award recipient of Excellence in Teaching just last year. Mike lives his belief as teaching is not what I do, but it's who I am. So since the inception of the lecture, Mike has been an integral part of the committee, which helps to ensure the prominent and relevant topics in today's agriculture and food that shapes our lives and shares through this annual event. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mike Connell.
Thank you, President Graves. For those of you who don't know her well, you have to be very careful around our new president. Like the Blues Brothers, she's on a mission from God. While Elwood and Jake were trying to save a nonprofit orphanage in Calumet City, Pat's mission is to save a nonprofit college in Monmouth, Illinois. There's a lot of similarities. Don't say hello to her, or she'll assign you a task and put you on a committee. I've been blessed a couple of times. Good evening, friends. One of the joys of teaching at Monmouth College is watching our students reach their full potential, live meaningful lives, pursue successful careers, and shape their communities and the world through service. the world through service and leadership. Those words, I didn't write them, they're from our Monmouth College mission statement. And they had not yet been written when Robin was a student here and taking classes from Rod Lemon and Homer Shoemaker. But those words accurately describe what Robin has accomplished since leaving Monmouth College. What was unstated but true in 1990 has been clearly articulated and is still true today. Robin Galloway, class of 1990, is an accounting major from Monmouth College. Since then, she's gone on to lead some of the largest food companies in the country, serving as Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and Chief Executive Officer. A lot of chiefs in there. Along the way, she's built a reputation for strong leadership, for mentoring teams and guiding organizations through times of real change. Honest businesses and good farmers that supply needed products are indeed a service to society that enriches our nation, and she's done that. On the nonprofit side, Robin has given her time and her talents to literacy programs, youth mentorship, and in service to her alma mater. She serves as a trustee on the chair of our college's finance committee, and you have to be someone pretty special for Gus Hart and Bill Goldsboro to trust you with the college's endowment. Tonight, she's here to share her insights on consumer food trends, food labeling, and supply chain, topics that affect us every day. Please join me in giving a warm Fighting Scots welcome to our very own Fighting Scot, Robin Goss.
I'm live, right? Okay, perfect. First of all, there's a lot of chiefs in that statement, and really what it means on your business card is head cheerleader. So that's why I tell people when they say, what do you do? I said, I'm head cheerleader. So anyway, thank you very much for being here, and Jean for giving me the opportunity to speak to the group. While I am not directly tied to agriculture, I've worked for a lot of food manufacturing companies where we've purchased a lot of commodities, and the supply chain and the farms that supply us are so important. So let me tell you about myself personally, just for a minute. So I actually grew up in a suburb of Chicago, Barrington, and Barrington's countryside outside of Chicago. I tell people we had horses. I spent a lot of time outdoors. So long before I had a driver's license, I was mobile. I could get around. I just did it on a horse. But the bottom left-hand corner is my best friend from Monmouth. Her dad was the chair of the physics department here, if anybody remembers Dr. Scove. That was Sarah and myself in Savannah earlier this year. I was a Kappa here, and thank you for the Kappas for showing up. I found my way to Monmouth because, I'll just let you in on a secret, I passed half my classes my freshman year at Miami of Ohio. Mom and Dad said it's kind of expensive if you're going to pass half your classes. So I took a gap year before it was a thing. And during that time, I worked at a bank as a bank teller. And after about a year, I decided I really needed the college education and to go back to school. So I looked in the Midwest, and Monmouth, I looked at a bunch of different schools, and Monmouth was the one that made me feel welcome. A lot of the other schools, the conversation was, well, if you come here, you'll be on probation, you don't have enough credits to transfer in, and Monmouth welcomed me with open arms. And I will tell you, it was the perfect experience for me, and I'm so grateful for what I learned here. I like to travel. That picture is actually me in Ireland on a golf course outside of Dublin. I got to do that this year. And that black and white thing in 4th of July gear, that is my partner in crime. That is Timber. She is a 10-and-a-half-year German short-hair pointer. So if anybody's had a hunting dog, you realize that they pretty much act like they're 2 years old for their whole life. So from a professional standpoint, as I told the intermediate accounting class today, I said, yep, it's a bit of a hot mess when you look at my professional career. But I've been very, very lucky. I've worked for some great companies. I've had a lot of really good experiences. And quite honestly, I've had to be a little bit brave, which I think is something I learned here at Monmouth, because I think if I count right, I've lived in 11 different states, I've worked for 9 different companies, and I've had 15 different job changes. So I've moved around a bunch. I actually started downtown Chicago in oil and natural gas at Amoco. I ended up in Detroit at Johnson Controls in the automotive side of that business. And then, so the states in red are where I've lived. So I moved from Illinois to Detroit, and then from Detroit, I was back in Illinois working for Johnson Controls, and I needed a career move, and I needed a corporate office that was in the Chicagoland area. Any kind of a career move had to go back to Detroit. So I found my way to Dean Foods, and I joined their ice cream division as, like a senior accountant working for them. And that was really when my first foray into consumer packaged goods and food manufacturing. And I think I found my niche there. I loved it. I loved manufacturing. I loved consumer foods. I had a great run at Dean's. I was there 10 years and had increasing roles. I was on accounting when I started. I was a controller. I was a group controller. And then I found my way into finance. And so finance, more of the analysis, what are the business decisions we're going to make. And I found myself as VP of Finance for one of the big divisions, and I was reporting to the CFO, and I realized I was never going to be the CFO. So I wanted to be a CFO, and to get the first one on your resume, somebody's got to give you a chance. And Restaurants Unlimited in Seattle, Washington, the one random red, I don't know why I picked red, my favorite color maybe. It was out there. We owned and operated 48 restaurants in 14 states. So had a bunch of fun doing that over a few years. But if anybody remembers, I joined Restaurants Unlimited in summer of 2008. And in September of 2008, Shearson Lehman crashed, markets crashed, everybody stopped eating out. The problem when you're operating restaurants. And it was one of those jobs where if somebody had told me going in what was going to occur over the next 3.5 years, I would have never signed up for it. But when you get through it on the backside, you think that, holy cow, I would have never learned as much or been involved in as many things if I hadn't had that opportunity. So I did that for a little over 3.5 years, and I found my way to Blue Bunny. So family-owned business in western Iowa, and was CFO there, working for the Wells family. Loved it. I was back in ice cream. But at some point, Schwann's came calling. And Schwann's was a much larger company. They were up in Minneapolis, so a little bit bigger community. I was ready to make a move, and I was the CFO for Schwann Foods. I was recruited away and ended up at Fieldbrook Foods. So that's the New York. And Fieldbrook Foods is an ice cream manufacturing company that's a private, they do private label. They don't own any of their own brands. They just make ice cream for everybody else. So we made Kroger ice cream, Dollar General. We actually did a little bit of Ryers for Unilever at the time too. But it was western New York outside Buffalo. And it's true, it really can snow 2 feet in Buffalo, New York. It was quite a place. We had some challenges. So I came to Fieldbrook Foods as a consultant for 3 months. One of my bankers had recommended me to this company. They were going through some financial challenges. They had a CFO. They needed somebody to come in and mentor their CFO. So I said, I'll consult for you, as I was commuting from Minneapolis. During that time period, about 3 months later, they offered me the chief operating officer role. They didn't want to replace their CFO, but they needed somebody to mentor him. I said, okay, I'll do it. But I just still have to commute. You have to let me go back and forth. And 2 days after I took that job as a full-time employee, we had a massive product recall. And so we were recalling a year's worth of ice cream throughout the whole country. And if you think about it, we didn't own our own brand. So what was in the news wasn't our brand, it was our customer's brand. And they were having to pull product off the shelf. Super disruptive. Dairy business, we had the Food and Drug Administration practically living at our plant because we had those dairy issues. So we had customers that were decertifying us. A lot was going on. And 6 weeks after that happened, our CEO decided he didn't want to be CEO anymore. He wanted to go do something else. He didn't want to run a business. And I got the opportunity to be CEO. I was offered the role. And the business, like, it was a train wreck at this point. Nothing was going right every single day. And I thought to myself, oh, good grief. Like, I don't know if anybody's going to succeed as CEO of this business. So I went home, I thought about it, and I thought, okay, you're going to do the job while they're looking for a CEO. Might as well just step up, be brave, and say yes. So that's really how I got my first CEO role. I wasn't really looking for it, but I had the courage to say yes, and loved it. We stabilized the business, we sold the business, flew money. It was great. 15 months later, it was a great outcome, and I didn't have a job for a few months, which is really a nice place to be too. But ended up getting recruited to Dairy Farmers of America. So when Dean Foods went bankrupt, if anybody remembers that, in November of 2019, they declared bankruptcy. Dairy Farmers of America actually purchased 75% of the assets, which are pretty much milk and ice cream plants from Dean Foods. DFA purchased it out of bankruptcy. And so they put together a big commercial consumer goods division within DFA. And people I had worked with back at Dean Foods called me and said, hey Robin, we're putting together an ice cream division. It has 8 manufacturing plants. We want you to run it. Would you come to Dallas and run it? So I did. So Dallas is a little bit darker because I've lived there twice now. And I worked for DFA for a little over 2 years and was recruited away to Concord Foods. Concord does a lot of dry blended seasonings. If anybody's from the Northeast, clam fry mix for the summertime out on the Cape, we sell a lot of clam fry breading. We also did a lot of caramel. The caramel that's in the Ghirardelli chocolate squares is actually manufactured outside of Boston. And that was supposed to be a 2-year turnaround. So again, kind of stagnant business, needed to do a turnaround, and it went better than we expected it to. And 13 months after I had started, to the day, we closed on the sale of that business. And we closed on it to a company that did similar stuff to us. So again, I was out of the job, was great. Another 2 months walking around Boston with timber. I was in better shape then too. But, so the company, Fieldbrook Foods, Concord Foods, were owned by the same private equity firm out of Chicago. And they invited me to a meeting in Chicago, and I went to that meeting and they were talking about some of the companies they owned, and they had this business in Athens, Georgia that was struggling. They had bought 80% of the business, they had left the founder in place, they weren't getting transparency and information, the business wasn't performing, they needed to replace the CEO, and they were gonna put an interim in. So again, be brave, right, or not, and just be crazy. I went to him, I said, how do you guys feel about if I signed up for another tour of duty with Arbor Foods and joined Dr. G's as your CEO? And that's really how I ended up in Athens, Georgia, which is where I live today outside of Atlanta, home of University of Georgia. We do, Dr. G's, we do poultry ingredients, so Southeast, big poultry processing. So we do functional ingredients, we do breading, and all of that. We actually don't manufacture it, we design it. Our R&D develops it, and then we sell it to customers. And then they'll go tell the Tysons or the Purdue's or Pilgrim's Pride, hey, you have to buy this ingredient and use it on our product. So that's how I ended up in Athens, Georgia. South Carolina is in green because that is my nirvana. That is where I'm going to land when I finally stop raising my hand for jobs, is South Carolina. The low country speaks to me. But, you know, I've really been lucky in my career, and I've worked a lot in food, obviously. A lot of ice cream. I do have, you know, my heart and soul is with ice cream. But over the years, I have seen a lot change in the food labeling, the regulatory aspect of consumer foods and food products. And some of it's been driven by consumer trends. Some of it, because of the labeling, I've seen consumer trends change the supply chain. And that's really what I just wanted to share with you today, is a little bit of that and maybe give you some things about food labeling you may or may not know. Now, before I do that, is anybody an expert in food labeling? Okay, few. I was gonna have to ask you to leave, because I am not. I'm not an expert, but I've been around it enough to know certain things. So we're gonna do a show of hands. Food and Drug Administration. Who thinks it's older than 100 years old? Okay, we've got 3. Who thinks it's less than 100 years? Okay, who's not voting? Okay, we got a few. Thank you for your honesty. So, Lewis is right. So the Food and Drug Administration came around in the 1930s as a result of the Pure Food and Drug Act. And the Pure Food and Drug Act was the first time the government regulated interstate consumer food products crossing for human consumption. And it was really put in place because there was misleading packaging and products were being misbranded or adulterated when they crossed. And so that's really when the Food and Drug Administration came into existence. I'm trying to check my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything. So they've really been around for over 120 years. And what you'll see in what I'll share is over time, regulations have changed. They've become a little bit more stringent or strict on how they approach food manufacturing. But before I do that, let's talk about this guy, right? The nutrition label, we're all familiar with it, right? It's on all of our products in the grocery store. And I've got another voting opportunity for you here. So, and it's standardized, this nutrition label. It's got the same components, same font size, package to package, same font relationship. And who thinks that nutrition label, like regulation around nutrition labeling on food packaging, you have 3 choices. So your first choice is, when did it occur? So did it occur during Prohibition? Did food labeling, this nutrition label, get regulated during World War II as part of rationing and ration books? Or did it come about in the 1990s? So who thinks the regulation around nutrition labeling came around in Prohibition? Okay, we got a couple. How about World War II during ration books? We have a few more of those. Okay, so the rest of you, 1990s? Yeah, you guys are right. So there was a Nutrition Labeling and Education Act that was passed in 1990, and during that act, this nutrition label had to be in effect on all panels, on all food products, effective January 1st, 1994. So they gave us a long time to put it in place, but that's when this nutrition label came into play. And what's interesting about this is that they've started different food products. You'll notice like serving sizes are the same. So before this labeling came into effect, a company could change their serving size such that the calories in the nutritional statement could look more advantageous. So this put everybody on an even playing field. If you're in an ice cream product, your serving is X, regardless of what brand of ice cream it is. So now you can actually compare label to label, and it'll be on an even playing field. So we've got the FDA, we have the standardized nutrition label, we have these things called standards of identity. Is anyone familiar with that term? So I had no idea what it was until I got into ice cream, and we were trying to come up with flavors. But standards of identity have been around for a while. I think the FDA has been defining them, I can't remember how many years now. The USDA administrates it, but the FDA defines it. A standard of identity is what you can call a product. So it's actual definition around naming of a product. So I've got an example here with hamburger. And it's based on what are the ingredients or components that go into that product, or what is the relationship of those ingredients to one another. So hamburger, you can see it's chopped fresh beef, it's with or without the addition of beef fat. You can have seasoning in there, but it cannot have more than 30% of fat in the burger. But it cannot have added water, can't have added phosphates, it can't have binders or extenders added to it. So if you want to call something a hamburger, it has to be pretty pure. Now, if you want to call something a beef patty, if you look at the end of that second line there, binders or extenders, mechanically separated species used in accordance with without or with added water can be used in the product. So I've got to refer to my notes because this was a little bit interesting for me. Hopefully nobody is just a huge Burger King fan. So let me read you the ingredient statement on a Whopper. 100% beef, in parentheses it says no pork, so it's 100% beef. Salt and pepper seasoning. Salt and pepper, I'm still not quite clear on what a salt and pepper seasoning is that's different from salt and pepper, but that's on the nutritional statement. Canola oil and silicon dioxide. Who knows what silicon dioxide is? Got it? So also referred to as silica, right? Silica kind of sounds like sand. So it's actually, a naturally occurring silica is a derivative of quartzite, and it's ground up. And it helps as an anti-caking agent, actually there's a lot of silica in shredded cheese, because then the cheese won't stick together in the package. So it sounds yummy, doesn't it? So a Whopper is a Whopper. It's not a hamburger because it's not a standard of identity. There's a little over 250 standards of identity. Every food does not fall into a standard of identity. The way it works, though, is if you want to call a food that product, it has to meet the regulations. And you see that CFR there above the definition for hamburger. CFR refers to the Code of Federal Regulations. This is actually regulatory. It is statutory. This is the law. And this is how it's defined. Now here's a more fun, and this is a lot of words, but this is ice cream, right? So we're going to get to something I love. So ice cream, if you read it, it has to have 10% milk fat. We were talking about this at dinner a little bit. So an ice cream is 10% milk fat, 10% milk solids. Now, milk solids, think about powdered milk. That's what's left. That's your milk solid after you evaporate all the water out of it. And you can have a higher milk fat percentage in your ice cream. You can have 12%, and then you only have to put 8% milk solids in. But in total, it has to be 20%. But ice cream has to be at least 10% milk fat. Fat's the expensive part when you make ice cream. And it's not laid out here, but there's this process called incorporating overrun. So when you churn ice cream through a continuous freezer, you're actually incorporating air into it. So you start with, we used to call it a mix, and it was cream, sugar, emulsifiers, we would add flavoring to it, think about vanilla, or we'd add color to it. My personal favorite, mint chip, the green color, we'd add that. So you would start with a gallon of mix, and as you incorporate air into it, we would incorporate what we would call 100% overrun. So 1 gallon of liquid mix turns into 2 gallons of ice cream. You can incorporate more. You can put 110% or have 110% overrun. You can't call that ice cream. Ice cream has to be 10% fat, at least 10% fat, and can have no more than 100% overrun in it. That's all defined. That bottom paragraph is how you define frozen custard. So there has to have a certain amount of egg yolk solids in order to be called a frozen custard. Sherbet has a standard of identity. It has less milk fat requirement in it, but it has to have a fruit component in order to call it a sherbet. A sorbet has no dairy, but it has to have a fruit component. Those are the 4 definitions around what we would generally refer to as ice cream. So has anyone bought ice cream lately? Does it say ice cream or does it say frozen dairy dessert on it? And does anyone even know about frozen dairy dessert? So frozen dairy dessert, and if you look, this is a way that companies have found to reduce costs out of the product. So frozen dairy dessert is not a standard of identity. What it is nomenclature such that if I can't call it ice cream, what do I call it? And nowadays, like we saw packaging shrink, right? Everybody was taking costs out. We used to buy a half gallon of ice cream. That went down to 56 ounces. Now it's 48 ounces. I will actually give you a challenge. If you have Blue Bunny ice cream in your store, go look at it. Their flavors, vanilla is still 48 ounces. Vanilla is the cheapest flavor you can make. But like their good stuff, Bunny Tracks that has caramel in it, has candy pieces in it, it's not 48 ounces, it's 46. So look at it on the shelf. They actually short fill the package for their expensive flavors. So they've tried to take costs out through changing the package size. But it gets to a point where if you reduce 46 ounces anymore, essentially you might as well just go buy 2 pints, right? So they found ways to lower the cost of the ingredients. And so from an ice cream standpoint, they call that frozen dairy dessert. So you're probably eating 8% milk fat and maybe 110% overrun. But if you can't call it ice cream, you call it something else. So let me ask the question, gelato, right? So think about gelato. When did it hit markets? 10, 12, no, 15 years ago with Talenti. Who thinks there's a standard of identity for gelato? No one? Oh, you're so smart. I couldn't find one. There is no standard of identity for gelato. Now, as consumers, we probably know what we think gelato should be, right? Because we've seen it and it's a little bit softer product and all of that. But literally, there's nothing regulation around gelato. So you could make almost anything and call it gelato and sell it. Let's see, besides standard of identity, there's a handful of other labeling terms that are regulatory, that are defined, that consumers may or may not be aware of. And actually, let's talk about consumer trends for a minute, because a lot of you, or at least I did not see a lot of hands, didn't recognize that ice cream was labeled as frozen dairy dessert, and that there's literally a difference. There's a cost difference between those two things to the manufacturer. So from a consumer trend standpoint, that never resonated. That didn't change purchase behavior. Consumers are still getting something that's cold, wet, sweet, taste to it, right? Didn't change consumer behavior. Certain things can change consumer behavior, and we'll talk about that. But here's some other labeling terms that are actually defined and are regulatory. So when you see these on packages, they mean things. So low fat. So low fat means in that serving size, you cannot have more than 3 grams of fat per serving. And your calories cannot exceed 30% coming from fat, your total calories. So when you see something low fat, they're not making that up. It's not less fat. It means there's less than 3 grams per serving and total calories, no more than 30% comes from fat. All natural. What do we think of when we think of all natural? Right? No artificial colors, no artificial preservatives, no artificial ingredients. And And I would say that's all true. When we look on a package, we'll see that, and manufacturers put in natural ingredients, natural colors. However, there is no regulation around all natural. It is literally not a defined term. So there is no governing body that specifies when you use the words all natural, what does it mean? So consumers look at that, and they look at the packaging and they think, oh, I'm getting an all natural product. And they are. They're not gonna get artificial colors or artificial preservatives because the manufacturer would be at risk of misbranding or mislabeling. But it's actually not a defined term, which I was surprised by. Flavor. If you see flavored on your packaging, you're not getting the real deal, right? So if a food contains natural characters and an artificial flavor, you have to call it artificial flavored. So I'm going to remove the names to protect the innocent here, but let me read you. I went to one of the ice cream websites and I pulled up a description for an ice cream bar, so it's a stick bar. And let's see, where does it start? So this stick bar is artificially flavored vanilla, frozen dairy dessert with caramel dipped in milk chocolate flavored coating and crunchy cookie pieces. So really long description, but you're not getting chocolate. It's not dipped in chocolate. It's dipped in a coating that is flavored like chocolate, and you're getting frozen dairy desserts. You're not getting a high-fat product. Made with. This was a term I learned in the poultry business. We didn't really use it in ice cream, but made, and what we'll see in the poultry side is made with whole muscle. So you think about, you process a bird, you cut the breast off, right? You're getting the whole muscle. And a lot of times a fillet will be made with the whole muscle, or you'll get the whole chicken breast. Sometimes what they do is they take that and they cut it up and they chop it up and they form it into something else. Now what they'll say is it's made with whole muscle, but it's not the whole muscle itself. So that was a new one for me. Chicken nuggets, you think it's just stamped out of the breast. Well, the breast is probably really chopped up, put back together again. And then distributed by versus manufactured by. Has anybody noticed this on packaging? When you look on the back, like companies, I don't know if this resonates. So if it says manufactured by, whoever's manufacturing it is typically the brand on the front of the label, and so they are actually doing all of the manufacturing. When it says distributed by, it means that company doesn't own 100% of their manufacturing supply chain. So all the product that we made at Field Brick Food, I mentioned it was private label. We did Kroger, Dollar General, those guys. On the back of their package, it will say distributed by Kroger because they can't claim manufacturing of all of their products across all of their products and all of their manufacturing system. So it's a slight nuance. Sometimes it's a little goofy because you can set up tax shelters so you can have multiple entities as a corporation. So it doesn't always mean they don't do their own manufacturing, but they may not do all of their own manufacturing. So labeling is important, and there's a lot of regulation around labeling, and it's really developed over time. But this idea of protecting food for consumer human consumption has been around for a long time. And it was really done to protect how packages were labeled from a transparency standpoint. And they, again, didn't want misbranding or false claims. So I'm going to take you back a little bit. So this was before regulation. So I pulled a couple labels before regulatory requirements. So let's start with Wrigley Spearmint Gum on the left. At the very bottom on the far left, healthful. I have yet to find the way to define healthful chewing gum. So they're making a claim it's healthful, but there really isn't any science to back that up. and this is all before regulation. So now we have regulation in place. But look at, I think it's Coons pastry flour. The very top of that label is an antidote for indigestion. I have yet to hear about flour actually helping from an indigestion standpoint. Baking soda maybe, but not pastry flour. So, you know, it's kind of, you hear the stories of the snake oil salesman who could sell you a tonic that, you know, could calm your heartbeat, grow hair, and make you taller, right? It could do all those things all at once. And so regulation was really put in place to protect consumers in that regard. Some of the regulations, some of the labeling, though, consumers do rely on. And they rely on it, and there's structure around it. So let's talk about a few of those. Top left, kosher certification. Right, so I chose this is the Chicago Rabbinical Council logo. There's others, there's a circle U, I think there's probably 3 or 4 total, that when you see that on a package, you know as a consumer that a rabbi has come through the manufacturing facility and has audited the facility, and they come on a regular basis, especially when they like ice cream. They come a lot. Yeah, our New York guy came a lot. But they audit to make sure that you aren't cross-contaminating products in a way that's not kosher. So you have to keep things separate. So you rely on that claim and that symbol on the package. And a company is paying the rabbi to do that so that we can use that symbol on our package. I'm going to skip RBST free for a minute because we're going to come back to that. USDA organic. And I don't know if anyone has an organic farm here, but the USDA is the certifying agent for being able to call something organic. And it's very regulated and defined. They actually come on site, and it's dependent upon how you're handling product, how you're taking care of your field, what you're using from a pesticide fertilization standpoint. So it's a relatively long process, and you can't use this label on product until you've actually been certified organic. So, anybody know how long it takes to certify a farm to be organic? How long do you have to operate a farm under organic conditions until you can get the certification?
4 years? 5 years?
3 years. 3 years. It takes 3 years to convert a farm. So if you think about it, you're running a farm over a 3-year time period under organic conditions, you know, typically more costly, right? You don't have the same type of pesticides, fertilizers, but yet you can't sell any of your product with that organic premium price to it until you get through that 3-year process. Now, for kicks and grins, anybody know how long it takes to convert a cow organic so that the milk she comes out with can be certified organic and used in organic products? It's only a year. So it takes 3 years for a farm. It only takes a year for a cow. So before that cow, so that cow has to be under organic conditions for a year before she can become certified. But we can rely on that label now because it's a very structured certification process. We've got, non-GMO has been a big thing. I mean, has that touched anybody here? Has anybody tried to run non-GMO product and not have bioengineered seed in their fields? Because that's become a thing. I want to say it was 5 or 6 years ago. The FDA required anybody that had bioengineered products anywhere in their ingredient stream, you actually have to label that on the back of your package. So if you look on the back, it's in small font, and it can either be a little QR code, it can be a phone number you can call, or there can be a statement, but it will say, this product was manufactured with bioengineered ingredients on it. And if you have non-GMO, you can get certified to use the non-GMO verified. What's interesting is I have not seen consumer behavior, at least in the industries I've been in, change where the consumer drives and wants a non-GMO product. I haven't seen it, not yet. And obviously the FDA thinks it's important enough that we actually have to call out, we have bioengineered products in our food. But again, kind of like frozen dairy dessert, it's in the news a little bit, it's talked about, but it doesn't change consumer behaviors. Now, RBST free. Anybody dairy farmer? Anybody know what RBST is? Okay. Our RBST is, I'm going to butcher it, recombinant bovine somatotropin. It's a synthetic hormone, and when a cow calves, they lactate for 10 months, and obviously during that cycle, you're going to have high points of lactation, and at a high point, more information than you ever wanted to know about cows, I'm sure. They give off 4 to 6 gallons of milk a day. But as that 10-month cycle starts to wane, then the naturally occurring hormone that allows the cow to lactate drops off, right? Because the calf theoretically is going to be weaned and the cow doesn't need to generate as much milk. So this hormone was developed by Monsanto, and what it does is you give it to them at a certain point in their lactation cycle, and I can't remember if it's like 2 months left, I can't remember. But instead of that drop off, it holds the curve, and you won't see as fast of a drop off, and so the cow will generate more gallons of milk per day. So that's more valuable, right? So a cow that's only going to lactate for 10 months is going to generate more raw milk over that 10-month time period with the hormone than without. And we started to see this probably somewhere 2005, early 2000s, that some of the dairy products were being labeled with RBST free. So the farmers were not, a small percentage, farmers were not using the hormone to generate more milk out of the cow. So you have to pay a premium for that, right? Because the cow's not as valuable because it's not going to generate as much milk, so my RBST-free milk is more expensive. So 100 pounds of milk costs $16.50. RBST-free milk at the time had a 75-cent premium to get that, so a 5% premium to get that. Well, fast forward to today, and if you look in the dairy case, almost everything says RBST free. So what's happened is consumer perceptions, and I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute, because this hormone you cannot test and you can't see it in the milk. So there's misperception out there that this hormone is going to create a growth hormone that is going to transfer to humans. So the hormone generates the lactation, it does not transfer to milk. You can't test it. It's completely unsubstantiated that there's human growth hormone risk from this. But consumers weren't educated, right? It's, oh, that you're giving a cow hormone, it's got to be bad, it's going to be bad for me, I'm not going to give it to my kids. So what's happened is less than 10% of the raw milk coming off of farms today are from farms that still use the hormone. So essentially the whole industry has shifted to RBST free. And that pricing of that premium has now become base pricing, right? And so that's what we're living with. Now, we can argue, is it more humane to the cow or not? I don't know on that one. But that's where you can see like a consumer trend driving changes in the supply chain. And like that's quite a process. Like some of these dairy farms have 5,000 head. So, you know, two more gallons per cow per day on 5,000 cows, that's a lot of milk. So let's take a real life example. So let's look at a Cheerios box for a minute. So at the top, when we think about claims, at the top right corner, it's gluten-free, it's no artificial flavors, and no artificial, is it colors? Colors. But then under Cheerios, it says, here's my made with 100% whole grain oats. So the product itself is not 100% whole grain oats. It's made with 100% whole grain oats, but there's other stuff in there as well. And then if you look at the big banner below, right? Lower cholesterol. It is the biggest font. It is in different color. That's very intentional from a marketing standpoint. But there's qualifiers around it. It can help. Doesn't say it does help. It can help as part of a heart-healthy diet. But see the little asterisks next to it? And I've never paid a lot of attention to the Cheerios box until this. So look at the asterisk down here in smaller font, and it essentially defines what that means. And it means that you have to have 3 servings of soluble fiber daily, of whole grain foods, but you also have to do it with a, gosh, that looks a little distorted, sorry about that. Risk of heart disease, but it has to be part of a low saturated fat diet and heart healthy practices. So, and then it goes on to say Cheerios provides 1 gram a serving. So they act like this is your path to lower cholesterol, and it can help, but you have to do other things, and it's only 1 serving. But again, highly regulated, like they can't claim it's helpful or that it is good for digestion. They have to qualify it from that standpoint. So I guess the takeaways for the group, and what I wanted to convey is packaging these days has come a long way from years ago, and words on food packaging are very important, and some of them we understand or we know, some of them we don't, like frozen dairy desserts. And I would ask you the next time you go to the grocery store to spend a little bit of time. It's an investment to take the time to read every package. I don't read every package, but it takes time, and if you don't understand what things are saying, like most of my stuff came from Google, so you can Google the Code of Federal Regulations. It is a big snooze fest to read, but you can get the information. In saying all of that, and we can see how it drives consumer trends. Some things it moves the needle on, some things it doesn't. But I wanted to leave you with, what does it take to get a product to market? How many people are involved in actually concept to having a product on shelves? So it starts with marketing. Marketing comes up with a brief. We need to create this new cereal, it has to have this kind of flavor, and you have to have these kinds of claims on the packaging, because that's what the consumer wants and needs. And marketing is a lot of statistics. I don't know if we have any marketing majors, but there is a ton of data analysis that goes behind marketing around consumer trends and all of that. So they come up with a marketing brief of, here's the product we think we can sell. Poor guys in R&D have to make it. So now they've got to figure out, how do I make a product that tastes good and meets all of these requirements that marketing gave me? And marketing probably also gave me a price point. So I have to figure out what, I can't make it too expensive because we won't be able to make any money when we sell it. Then it goes to consumer testing. So after they've done in-house testing, there's actually companies out there you can sign up for, and you can be can do consumer testing. So the companies will actually take pilot samples of their product, and they will ship it to you in your home, and they want you to use it in the house. It's called an iHut. So it's in-home user testing. And they send it to you, you have to fill out a survey, and they determine, is it easy to use? Are the directions on the packaging understandable? But they'll do it and test it with consumers in a smaller way before they do a large launch. They'll take the feedback, and then if they have to tweak anything, they tweak tweak it. So then we've got our graphic designer. Like, she or he has to come up with the actual package. And as we looked at on the Cheerios box, font is important. And there's actually regulations around font, sizes, relationship to one another. You've seen the pharmacy commercials on TV, like the drugs, and you can't read the fine print at the bottom, right? Or they say it so fast you can't understand them. So the graphic designer comes up with packaging, and then the compliance department has to approve it, right? So typically all of these large companies literally have a team of nutrition and regulatory labeling people, that is their job to say, no, the ingredient statement has to say this, here's what your nutrition label, you can claim this, you can't claim that. I will tell you, we had a huge debate. We had to change all of our vanilla because regulatory didn't want us calling it homemade vanilla anymore. We had to call it old-fashioned vanilla. It was so goofy. I'm like, it's been homemade vanilla for years and years. But they were spooked by consumer lawsuits, class action lawsuits, and they said, nope, we don't want you to call it homemade vanilla anymore. So the compliance department has to bless it, and that was the easy part. Now the supply chain has to get involved. You actually have to go procure those ingredients, you've got to bring them to manufacturing, you've got to run the product, doesn't always happen great out of the gate, and get it into distribution. So you have to ship it into all your warehouses, you have to sell it to customers, they have to want to buy it from you. Ship it to the warehouses, and then at some point it actually gets to your grocery store. So I think I knew this inherently, having worked at large companies, but when you look at this supply chain, and it takes from marketing brief to first ship date is probably 18 months minimum. And so it takes a really long time to develop and get a product to market. A lot of people are involved, a lot of cost. So when I think about, complaining that I'm buying a $6 or $7 package of ice cream, there's a lot of cost and there's a lot of development that went into it. And it's a little bit of a gamble with a new product because all of this is spent up front before you've ever sold anything. So I have a little bit of a new appreciation for my price points when I go to the grocery store. I can still complain a little bit about things, but I understand why things cost the way they cost, especially if they've got a whole bunch of certifications on it and I'm paying. I'm paying to be USDA organic, I'm paying the rabbi to give me a kosher certification, I'm paying some other certifying agency, and I'm paying for RBST free milk. So I kind of get it. But that's really what I wanted to share with you guys today. I hope you have a different appreciation for what you're going to look at when you go to the grocery store. I guess I'll leave you with two questions. Are you going to think differently and look at packaging when you go to the grocery store? Take the time. And my second question is, anybody want ice cream now after we've talked about it for so long? Right, it's like everybody, let's go uptown and grab some ice cream. So, anyway, thank you very much. You guys were great. Are there any questions? Because
We've got 2 microphones.
oh, perfect. Please make that easy.
That was a nice talk, thank you. I was curious, how are regulatory labels in the United States related to, let's say, European labels? I mean, I could imagine that Italy would have a definition of gelato, even if we didn't.
They probably do.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that European is stricter. So you actually have a cleaner ingredient statement required. I don't know a lot about European laws and regulation, but when I was at Dean Foods, so we think about the FDA as a governing, controlled parenting body, but when I was at Dean's and Dairy Farmers of America, we manufactured Baskin-Robbins ice cream. And we did it for the U.S. We also supplied a third of their franchisees overseas. So a lot of what we sold went into the Middle East. And we had to use cleaner ingredients, so less artificial colors, less emulsifiers, things like that. It was actually a more expensive product that we had to have to sell overseas. And they are stricter in Europe than we are in some of our definitions. So I don't know if they have frozen dairy dessert in Europe or not, but you're right, internationally is a little bit more strict. Now, probably not everywhere,
Sure.
probably not in India, but it just depends where you go.
Yeah, I visited my son who was in Armenia.
Okay.
At the grocery store there, and the ravioli had a sticker that said, "Made with real meat."
Ooh.
That was a little frightening.
Right, right, right,
What does that mean?
right, yes.
Yeah,
There's that made with again,
Yeah.
so,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. What else?
I was curious when you were talking about the non-GMO requirements, what's the value or what happens to that cow in that year that she's out of production? What's the goal? What are you trying to learn? Or why is it being demanded? Just that puzzled me.
Non-GMO specifically? Yeah, so non-GMO is like essentially, there's a lot of corn nowadays that's all genetically modified in order to protect it from disease, have a higher yield, right? It's a modified seed. So non-GMO doesn't have that genetically modified aspect to it. I'm not sure, like what the value is, because there isn't really a nutritional difference between the two. I think it's just more of a consumer perception of, am I having a more pure product available to me than not? So kind of like the RBST free is there's been no ties that hormone transfers into the milk, but yet consumer perception was such that everything became RBST free. Today, the non-GMO are putting bioengineered ingredients on the packaging. There hasn't been a change from a consumer standpoint. And I'm not sure if it was a flash in the pan for maybe a year or two, and so the FDA reacted and made us put it on the label. But like even some of our emulsifiers we would buy like guar gum or locust bean gum or other different types of gum, and some of that is grown under genetically modified environments. So we had to label it on our packaging, or we had cookie pieces. And it was, there was products that went into the cookie piece that had components that were genetically modified. But it's modified seed that's still grown naturally. I don't know why it's become such a big deal. And maybe it's not, and that's why there is no consumer reaction to it.
In the U.S.
In the U.S., that's true, yes. Yeah, I'm speaking of U.S. here, so. Anybody else?
I'll grab a question. Here, the agriculture community, sells both in the U.S. and obviously overseas market is an important part of the consumer piece. And your industry as well, right? In terms of, so how do you, like GMO foods or GMO-free foods in Europe is, the consumers there, that's a much higher demand than in the U.S., right? For plant-based foods. So foods like, you mentioned companies like Dean, like how do you, when you're sitting there at the beginning, how do you consider the different needs of different countries and cultures in the design of some of the products? Or do you pick the market?
Yeah, so like the marketing team, if they're gonna develop a new product, then they may launch it nationally first, and then if it has consumer appeal, then they launch it internationally, but then you may have to redesign the product, right? To me, what the consumer wants in the packaging or the ingredients and components internationally. I don't know that products are initially designed to be global from a launch standpoint. You probably kind of want to prove concept before you go take it nationally. If that was the question.
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of different countries and a lot of different cultural contexts.
Right.
So start somewhere and then,
Right.
yeah.
Well, even I think if you look at like a Coke product and you look at it outside of the United States, I think it's more of a pure cane sugar. I think it's actually different than just a Coke here. Now Coke started here, so I think it evolves that way. Anyone else? Yes, sir, in the back.
My question had to do with the sort of regulatory environment, and do you think it's just like an arms race where, you know, the USDA or the FDA comes up with a label or a regulation that says this is ice cream, and then everybody tries to sort of skirt it and say, well, you know, we'll be 109% and we'll call it frozen dairy dessert, or maybe close to frozen dairy dessert, or just about frozen dairy dessert, right? Like that every time you define a standard,
Right.
everything that becomes the sort of ceiling, everything falls to that standard.
Yeah.
Whereas if you didn't have a standard, then some people might have 25% fat. That'd be like super premium,
Right.
very expensive ice cream. But then if you make a standard, then people who were selling above the standard have no incentive to, because how do you then distinguish yourself from the 10% ice cream?
Right. So you have to make sure your consumers know that you're better than the standard, because you're going to want to charge a premium, right? So had the pleasure of dinner with Jean this evening, and her favorite go-to ice cream is Haagen-Dazs. So Haagen-Dazs is 14 to 16% butterfat. So the standard says I have to be at least 10% butterfat. So Haagen-Dazs doesn't have 100% overrun, they have 65% overrun. So the reason it's so hard to scoop is because there's like no air in it, and it's all fat, and tastes great. But Haagen-Dazs can charge a premium on the shelf. They're selling above the standard. Consumers like it and they know it's better product. They don't know that it's a higher fat content, and they don't know Haagen-Dazs can be called ice cream. A lot of things out there aren't ice cream, but the consumers don't necessarily make that connection. So what I would say is, these standards of identity are in place. I think companies are trying to find a way to replicate the product in such a way that it's cheaper to manufacture, it's a cheaper product, they get more profit. They may have to call it something different, but they're trying to find ways around the standards of identity. And it's not that it's a bad product, it's just that you can't call it ice cream if it's not this kind of a thing. So that's what I think. Yes?
You could probably have heard me anyway, but thinking of GMO products, there are some that are labeled non-GMO when there was never a GMO product at all for that particular thing.
Right.
But they're not lying, but it has
Right.
no significance. So
Yep.
to me, it kind of makes you feel a little less confident in some of the labeling.
It does. That's why we have to be smart about certain things. So here's another example for you. I don't know if anybody has seen on, like, if you buy beef, right? Sometimes you'll see on your beef packaging, hormone-free. So very typical, Dad can probably explain it to us, but it's very typical to use growth hormones in order to grow the animal bigger, faster in beef. You will also see that labeled sometimes on pork products or poultry chicken products. So the FDA does not let you use hormones in raising chickens and raising hogs. So it's on the package label and you think, oh, that's great. This animal was not raised with hormones. Well, you're actually not allowed to do it on pork and chicken. So it makes sense when you're looking at a beef product. But to your point, as a consumer, I'm like, oh, that's a good thing. When we don't know a lot of the regulations, right? We're just consumers at the store and then somebody's trying to market a product in such a way that we will buy this one instead of that one. So there is a lot of regulation around labeling, but there's things you can do to get around it. That's why that graphic designer in the marketing department, never trust them. Like they're just trying to get you to buy our stuff. Yes.
You mentioned before that the European standards are somewhat more strict. And I started paying attention to those standards a few years back when I saw a list of things that were not allowed in the European countries, such as SLS, sodium lauryl sulfate. So I started to read labels, and I can't believe how many products have SLS in them. Toothpaste, angel food cake, and so one thing I would suggest to people is pay attention to the Europeans. And I was wondering how much pressure our companies feel from European standards to pay attention to things that they're not allowed to use and we're being fed constantly.
Right. And I, like, most of my experience has been on the ice cream side. So what I can talk to is ice cream. What we've seen on the ice cream side is trends come from Europe. So something starts in Europe and then it migrates to the United States, but not necessarily from an ingredient utilization standpoint. Gelato was very much an Italian thing, very much Europe. Well, then Talenti brought it to the, well, they didn't bring it here, but Talenti started marketing it here, right? So we see a lot of food trends begin in Europe and come to the United States, but we don't have the same consumers, and I don't see companies changing their labeling and their ingredients to match a European standard necessarily. Now, again, just speaking from the ice cream industry, haven't seen that. But yeah, read your labels, and if you don't know what something is, look it up.
I mean, I think one of the things we learned tonight, and especially for our students, there's a lot that goes into what we put into our bodies, right? And there's a lot of people involved, from people that are, at the farm and sitting here, whether they're beef folks, whether they're corn, whether they're soybeans, whether they're chicken farmers, there's a lot. And then what does it take to get to our tables, right? There's thousands and millions of people involved. And to make sure that we're safe and things taste good. The other thing that we learned is that Jean has high standards, even in her ice cream, along with her lectures. And I think, Robin, you held that up in terms of the standards. So let's thank Robin and Jean for the